The porcelain cup trembled in Rin Cho's grip for exactly 1 second before Jordan Ashby's hand closed over his wrist and stopped him from lifting it to his mouth. "Check your coffee, sir," she said, low and urgent, her fingers still wrapped around his forearm as though she had not fully registered what she'd just done. "Please. Before you drink it." The dining room of the Cho estate in Los Angeles, Koreatown, went silent in the particular way a room goes silent when someone has broken a rule nobody speaks aloud. Jordan felt 3 sets of eyes on her from the doorway where the other household staff had frozen mid-motion, and she felt the weight of the man whose wrist she was gripping go very, very still. Renwoo did not pull away. He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face, and something in his dark eyes sharpened into a kind of focus she had never seen turned on her in the 4 months she had worked in his house. "Why?" he said. Not a question exactly. A demand wrapped in quiet. "The smell," Jordan said, and made herself let go of his wrist, her pulse hammering now that the moment's instinct had passed and the reality of what she'd done settled over her like cold water. "Bitter almonds under the coffee. I smelled it when I set the tray down. My grandmother kept bees and pressed almond oil for years, sir. I know that smell when it doesn't belong somewhere." Renwoo did not move for a long moment. Then he lifted the cup, not to drink from it, but to bring it close enough to his own face to breathe in over the rim, and Jordan watched his jaw tighten as whatever he smelled confirmed exactly what she'd said. "Cyanide," he said quietly, to no one and everyone. "In my own dining room." He set the cup down with a precision that was somehow more frightening than if he'd thrown it, porcelain meeting the table's dark wood, without a single sound of impact, a man in complete control of his own hands, even as everything around him had just tried to kill him. Jordan had come to work at the Cho estate the way most people in her circumstance came to money in Los Angeles, Koreatown, through a staffing agency that did not ask too many questions about a client's business, as long as the pay cleared on time. She was 22 years old, had a nursing degree she was still paying off and had not yet found work in, and had taken the housekeeping position because it paid nearly triple what the diners and coffee shops around her apartment offered. She wore the light blue maid's uniform the estate required, and told herself, every single morning for 4 months, that she was passing through, that this was temporary, that a man who ran what the household staff only ever referred to in careful whispers as the organization was not someone she needed to understand, only someone whose coffee she needed to deliver on schedule, and whose rooms she needed to keep silent and clean. She had learned, in those 4 months, the specific geometry of Renwoo Cho. He was 34, always in a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive tailoring fits a man who has never once in his adult life worn something off the rack, and he moved through the sprawling glass and stone house with a stillness that made the staff instinctively lower their voices when he entered a room. His eyes were a dark, unreadable brown that gave away nothing, and there was a thin scar along his left knuckle that Jordan had noticed once while setting his breakfast, a scar that told her, without a single word from him, that this was a man who had done violence with his own hands more than once in his life. He had never once been unkind to her. He had also never once seen her, not really, not in the way that mattered, and Jordan had told herself that this suited her fine. She did not need to be seen by a man whose business, whatever it precisely was, left grim-faced strangers coming and going from a study at hours no legitimate industry required. Now, standing in his dining room with the poisoned coffee sitting between them like an accusation, he was seeing her for the first time, and it was not comfortable to be seen this way, sharp and total and entirely, without the polite distance he'd maintained for 4 months. "Get Detective Song on the line," Renwoo said to the man hovering in the doorway, a broad-shouldered lieutenant named Baek Ho-yoon whom Jordan knew mostly as the person who scheduled deliveries and occasionally checked the household staff's identification with an intensity that seemed excessive for domestic hiring. "And find out who had access to the kitchen this morning." "Sir," Baek Ho said, already moving, but his eyes cut to Jordan with something that made her stomach tighten. Not gratitude. Suspicion. "She saved your life," someone said from the doorway. One of the kitchen staff, an older woman named Priscilla Mott, who had worked for the Cho family for over a decade and who Jordan had come to like in her quiet, careful way. "Baek Ho, do not look at that girl like she is the one who put poison in the pot." But Baek Ho's eyes did not soften, and Jordan understood. with a particular clarity that came from growing up having to read a room before the room decided anything about you first, that saving Renwu Cho's life had not made her safe in this house. It had made her a variable nobody had accounted for. Renwu studied her for another long moment, and then he did something that surprised the entire room, including, Jordan suspected, himself. "Miss Ashby," he said, using her surname for the first time in 4 months of employment, "you will not return to the kitchen staff's usual rotation today. You will remain where I can see you."
It was not a request.
The rest of that first day unfolded with the particular tension of a house that had just discovered a wolf inside its walls. Detective Song, a tired-looking man in his 50s who Jordan gathered had some long and complicated history with a Cho organization that involved more looking the other way than actual investigation, came and went with a small evidence kit and a lot of questions that circled but never quite landed on anything conclusive. The kitchen staff were questioned one by one in Renwu's study, Jordan included, and she found herself sitting across a wide mahogany desk from a man whose entire demeanor had shifted since that morning, sharper now, more present, watching her the way a chess player watches a piece that has just moved somewhere unexpected on the board. "Tell me again," he said. "How you knew?" "I told you already, sir. The smell." "Tell me again." So she told him again, the story of her grandmother's small apiary outside Baton Rouge, the way certain almond varieties carried a bitterness that most people never learn to distinguish from ordinary almond oil, the years of pressing oil in a hot kitchen where the smell had burned itself into her memory so thoroughly that she would know it anywhere, on anyone's breath, in anyone's coffee. Renwu listened without interrupting, his fingers steepled in front of him, and when she finished he was quiet for long enough that she began to wonder if she'd said something wrong. "You could have said nothing," he said finally, set the tray down, and walked away. "No one would have known you noticed." "I would have known," Jordan said, before she'd fully thought through whether that was the right answer to give a man like him. "I don't let people die in front of me if I can stop it. Doesn't matter who they are." Something moved behind his eyes at that, something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, a small crack in the composed stillness he wore like his tailored suits. "Even men in my line of work." "Even them," Jordan said. "Though I'd be lying if I said I understood exactly what your line of work is, sir. I've mostly tried not to ask." "Wise," Renwu said. "Most people who ask regret the answer." That should have been the end of the conversation, dismissal implied in the finality of his tone, but instead he leaned back in his chair and studied her a moment longer, and Jordan felt the particular discomfort of being looked at by someone who was actually seeing her, cataloging something about her that had nothing to do with whether the coffee was on time. "You have medical training," he said. It was not a question. "Nursing degree." "I haven't found placement yet. The market's tight, and I couldn't afford to keep interning without pay while paying rent. So, you clean my house instead." "So, I clean your house instead, sir. It pays better than most nursing assistant positions anyway, which tells you something ugly about how this country values the work." He almost laughed. She saw it, the corner of his mouth twitching before he suppressed it, and it occurred to Jordan for the first time that Renwu Cho was a man who had trained himself so thoroughly out of visible reaction that even small amusement felt like watching something rusted move for the first time in years. The investigation into the poisoning did not resolve quickly or cleanly, and over the following 2 weeks, the household settled into a new and uneasy rhythm. Renwu kept Jordan close, first out of what she assumed was simple caution, a witness he wanted where he could watch her, and then, gradually, in ways that felt less explicable by security concerns alone. He began taking his morning coffee in the small sunroom off the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, and he began asking Jordan, specifically, to bring it, rather than whoever was next in the staff rotation. He began, without ever quite acknowledging that he was doing it, arranging his schedule so that their paths crossed more often than the ordinary rhythms of a household staff and its employer required.
Baiko noticed.
Baiko did not approve, and one afternoon in the second week, Jordan found herself cornered in the hallway outside the kitchen by the broad-shouldered lieutenant, his voice pitched low enough that it would not carry to the rest of the staff. "I don't know what you think is happening," Baiko said, but a woman who conveniently smells poison in a cup of coffee and conveniently ends up spending her days at the boss's side afterward. That is a pattern I have seen before. It does not end well for the woman, and it does not end well for the organization. Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Yoon? Jordan kept her voice level despite the anger rising hot under her ribs. I am telling you that I am watching you. That is all. Men in his position accumulate enemies who are patient enough to wait months for the right opening. A pretty face who saves his life and then never leaves his side is exactly the kind of opening a patient enemy would arrange. I'm not anyone's opening, Jordan said, and stepped past him without waiting for a response. Though the accusation stuck in her chest like a splinter, she couldn't quite work free, because underneath her anger was a colder, more uncomfortable question. What if Baek-ho was not entirely wrong to wonder? What if the poisoning had not been aimed only at Renwoo, but had been engineered to test the household, to see who would react and how, and what if her own quick instincts had made her, without her consent, a piece on a board she did not know she was playing on? She raised the possibility with Renwoo that evening, finding him alone in his study with a glass of something amber and untouched at his elbow, and she watched his expression shift from mild surprise at her boldness in raising it to something more serious as he actually considered what she was suggesting. Baek-ho is thorough, Renwoo said. Sometimes to a fault. But he is not wrong to be careful. There are people who would use exactly this kind of situation, a poisoning attempt, a convenient hero, to insert someone close to me. He studied her across the room, the lamplight catching the sharp angles of his face. I do not believe that of you. You barely know me. I know more than you think, he said. I know you have worked in this house for 4 months and never once taken anything that was not yours, though you have had ample opportunity in a house that keeps far too much cash in far too many unlocked drawers. I know you speak to the kitchen staff with more respect than most people in my organization speak to each other. I know you smelled cyanide in my coffee and grabbed my wrist to stop me before you had time to consider what that would cost you if you were wrong.
He paused.
That is not the profile of someone sent to hurt me, Miss Ashby. That is the profile of someone who could not help herself. The intimacy of being read so precisely by a man who had spent 4 months barely acknowledging her existence sent something warm and unwelcome curling through Jordan's chest, and she found herself wanting, against every piece of good sense she possessed, to close the distance between them and see what would happen if she did. She did not. Not that night. But the danger that had entered the house with the poisoned coffee had not finished with the Cho estate, and 3 days later, it announced itself again, this time with considerably less subtlety. Jordan was walking the east perimeter path near the estate's garden wall on her way back from the staff quarters, later than she should have been out after dark, when a car she did not recognize slowed on the street beyond the wall, and a man leaned out with something in his hand that caught the streetlight in a way that made every instinct in her body scream danger before her mind had fully processed what she was looking at. She dropped flat behind the low stone border of the garden bed a half-second before the shot cracked through the evening air, close enough that she felt the displaced air of it pass somewhere above her, and then there was shouting, more shots, the heavy sound of the estate's security responding, and Renwoo's voice, sharper and more urgent than she had ever heard it, calling her name across the dark garden. He reached her before the security team did, dropping to the ground beside her and pulling her against his chest and the cover of the stone wall with a kind of controlled violence that told her exactly how close her death had just come and how little he had liked the possibility. You are not hit, he said, hands moving over her shoulders and arms with a quick, thorough efficiency, checking rather than caressing, though the touch still burned through the thin fabric of her uniform. Jordan, look at me. Are you hit? It was the first time he had ever used her first name, and even with adrenaline still roaring through her blood and the smell of gunpowder sharp in the summer night air, she noticed it, filed it away, understood without being told that something fundamental had just shifted between them. I'm not hit, she managed.
I'm fine.
You are not fine, Renwoo said, and there was something raw in his voice now, something the composed, careful man from the dining room and the study had never once let show. Someone shot at you in my garden. That is not fine. None of this is fine. The shooters were gone by the time security secured the perimeter, vanished into the anonymous traffic of the city, and the aftermath left the estate in a state of controlled chaos that lasted well into the night. Baek Ho barking orders into a phone, Detective Song arriving a second time with considerably more urgency than his first visit, and Renwoo, through all of it, refusing to leave Jordan's side, a fact that did not go unnoticed by anyone in the household. It was near 2 in the morning, the estate finally quiet again, staff sent to their rooms, security doubled at every entrance, when Renwoo found Jordan sitting alone in the small sunroom where he had taken to having his coffee, still in her uniform, still shaking faintly in a way she could not fully control no matter how she pressed her hands flat against her knees. He sat down across from her without a word, and for a long while neither of them spoke, the silence between them thick with everything that had happened and everything that had not yet been said. "I told myself, when the coffee happened, that keeping you close was strategy," Renwoo said finally. "A witness I needed to watch. A variable I could not afford to lose track of." He was quiet a moment. "That was a lie I told myself, Jordan. I have known it was a lie for some time now, and tonight, when I saw that car and understood what was happening in my own garden, I stopped being able to pretend otherwise." "What are you saying?" Jordan asked, though some part of her already knew, had known since the moment he'd said her name in the dark garden like it meant something. "I am saying that you are the first person in a long time who has made me feel like something other than what this house is made of me," he said, and his voice had gone low and rough in a way she had never heard from him. "I built a life out of calculation and distance because both things kept me alive and kept the people around me from becoming targets. You have been a target for 2 weeks now because you exist near me, and I find that I cannot make myself send you away, though every rational part of me knows I should." Jordan felt something crack open in her chest, something she had been holding rigid and guarded since the moment she'd grabbed his wrist in the dining room, and understood, in some instinctive way, that she had just stepped into something far larger than a household job. "Why haven't you sent me away?" she asked, though the question came out softer than she intended. "Because I do not want to," Renwoo said simply. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, wanting something has outweighed the cost of wanting it." He reached across the small space between them and took her hand, not with the urgent, checking touch of the garden, but slow, deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away if she wanted to. She did not pull away. His fingers were warm and calloused in a way that spoke of more than boardrooms, and when she finally looked up and met his eyes, the careful distance he had maintained for 4 months was simply gone, burned away by adrenaline and fear, and something that had clearly been building far longer than either of them had let themselves acknowledge. "This is a mistake," Jordan said, though she did not move her hand. "Yes," Renwoo agreed. "Almost certainly." Neither of them moved to correct it. The days that followed carried a charge that the household could not help but notice, though no one, not even Baek Ho, said anything directly about the new dynamic between the boss and the maid who had saved his life. Jordan found herself increasingly folded into Renwoo's orbit in ways that had nothing to do with security concerns, evenings spent in his study while he worked through papers and occasionally read passages aloud to her, quiet conversations over coffee that had nothing to do with cyanide, moments where his hand found the small of her back as they passed in a hallway that were entirely unnecessary and entirely deliberate. But the poisoning and the shooting had not been isolated events, and Detective Song's investigation, slow and grinding as it was, eventually produced a name, a rival faction operating out of the San Gabriel Valley, led by a man named Hansol Beck, who had spent the better part of the past year attempting to move into territory the Cho organization controlled, and who had apparently decided that removing Renwoo directly was worth the risk of open war. The confirmation came with a cost. 2 of Renwoo's men were found dead in a warehouse the organization used for legitimate import business, killed in a way that Baek Ho described to Renwoo in a voice tight, with barely controlled fury, and Jordan understood, watching Renwoo's face go carefully, dangerously still as he absorbed the news, that whatever gentleness had been growing between them over the past weeks existed alongside a version of him that was capable of the same violence that had just been visited on his people. "I need you to stay in the house," Renwoo told her that night, his voice flat in a way that told her this was not a request open for negotiation. "Do not leave the grounds." Not for anything until this is resolved. I'm not going to hide while you go handle this, Jordan said, and watched surprise flicker across his face, quickly replaced by something harder. This is not a discussion, Jordan. Han Solbeck has already tried to kill me once and shot at you in my own garden. I will not risk you again. You don't get to decide that unilaterally, Jordan said, standing her ground despite the danger radiating off him now, cold and controlled in a way that made the household staff flinch when he was like this. I have a nursing degree, Renwu. I know how to be useful in exactly the kind of situation you're about to walk into. If this comes to violence, and it sounds like it already has, you're going to need people who can keep your men alive, and I am one of the only people in this house with the training to do that. I will not use you as a battlefield medic, Renwu said, sharp now. You don't get to use me as anything, Jordan snapped back. I am telling you what I am capable of doing, and you can either accept the help or you can lose people you don't have to lose because you are too proud to let me contribute something other than looking pretty in a maid's uniform. The silence that followed stretched long and taut, Renwu's jaw working as he clearly fought the instinct to simply overrule her, and Jordan held his gaze without flinching because she had meant every word, and she was not going to be the woman who sat quietly in a sunroom while people she had come to care about walked into danger she could help mitigate. If anything happens to you, Renwu said finally, low and rough, I do not know what I would become. Then let's make sure nothing does, Jordan said. Together. The confrontation with Han Solbeck's faction came 4 nights later at a shipping facility near the port where Renwu's organization moved a significant portion of its legitimate cargo, a meeting that had been arranged under the pretense of negotiation, but that everyone involved understood was actually a test of whether either side would blink first. Jordan was not meant to be anywhere near the facility. She went anyway, riding in the second of 3 vehicles with a small emergency kit she had assembled herself, over Bekho's furious objections and Renwu's grim, resigned acceptance that he was not going to win this particular argument twice. The meeting went bad within minutes. Han Solbeck, a stocky man with cold eyes and a smile that promised nothing good, had brought considerably more men than the agreed terms allowed, and the first gunshot came before anyone had finished the opening pleasantries, shattering the tense quiet of the shipping yard into chaos. Jordan dropped low behind a stack of shipping containers with 2 of the household's younger enforcers, both of them clearly unprepared for how fast the situation had deteriorated, and across the yard she caught glimpses of Renwu moving through the fight with the exact lethal economy his household had always hinted at but that Jordan had never witnessed directly, every motion precise, nothing wasted, a man doing violence the way other men did arithmetic. It was terrifying. It was also, in a way she did not have time to examine, the moment she understood completely what kind of man she had let herself fall for. The fight turned when one of Han Sol's men, flanking wide around the containers, got a clean angle on Renwu's exposed back while his attention was locked on the 2 shooters directly in front of him. Jordan saw it a full second before anyone else did, saw the man raise his weapon, and she did not think, did not calculate the risk to herself, simply moved, breaking cover and closing the distance and slamming her full weight into the flanking shooter's arm as he fired, sending the shot wide into the shipping container instead of into Renwu's spine. The man rounded on her with fury, weapon swinging toward her instead, and for one suspended second Jordan understood she had just traded Renwu's life for her own in a way that might not have been a fair trade at all. But her nursing training had given her one other useful skill beyond triage, and she used it now, driving her knee up hard and fast into a pressure point she had learned in a self-defense course years ago, dropping the man to the ground gasping before he could level the weapon at her properly, and by the time he recovered, Bekho had already closed the distance and finished what Jordan had started. The fight ended minutes later, Han Solbeck's remaining men retreating once it became clear the encounter had cost them more than it had cost the Cho organization, and in the ringing silence that followed, Renwu crossed the yard to where Jordan stood, still catching her breath, adrenaline making her hands shake in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with what she had just done, without letting herself hesitate. You saved my life, Renwu said, and his voice carried a weight that told her he understood exactly what her split-second decision had cost her in risk. Again. We're even now, Jordan said, managing something close to a smile despite the tremor still running through her. You've been trying to protect me since the coffee. Figured it was my turn. He did not answer with words. He closed the remaining distance between them and kissed her there in the middle of the chaos and wreckage of the shipping yard, hard and certain, and entirely without the careful restraint he had maintained through every charged moment before this one, and Jordan kissed him back with the same fierce certainty, understanding in the marrow of her bones that whatever this was between them, it was no longer something either of them could pretend was only proximity or gratitude. Hans Solbeck did not attempt a third move against the Cho organization. Word moved fast through the particular channels that governed Los Angeles Koreatown's underworld, and a rival faction that had lost 2 attempts at eliminating Rinwoo Cho, the second of which had cost them men and territory in the resulting retaliation, found it prudent to withdraw from the disputed lines it had been pushing against for the better part of a year. Detective Song's investigation quietly closed without ever producing a public arrest, which Jordan understood, by now, was simply how these things resolved in a world that operated by its own private justice. 3 months passed. Jordan no longer wore the light blue uniform, though she still lived at the estate, in rooms that were entirely her own now rather than staff quarters, and she had finally, with Rinwoo's quiet insistence and considerable financial backing that she had initially refused before understanding it was offered without any expectation attached, begun the process of securing her nursing licensure and a placement at a hospital not far from the estate. She found him on the evening of her first successful placement interview standing in the sunroom where their earliest careful conversations had happened, 2 cups of coffee sitting on the table between them, and she watched him check hers with a small, private motion before sliding it toward her, a gesture that had become their particular ritual over the past months. Quiet proof of everything that had changed since the morning she'd grabbed his wrist and told him to check his coffee. You didn't have to do that, Jordan said, settling into the chair across from him. I trust the kitchen staff now. I do it because I want to, Rinwoo said. Not because I doubt anyone in this house. Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making certain nothing ever comes near you again without my knowing first. Jordan studied him across the small table, this man who had built an empire out of calculation and distance and who had, somewhere in the space of a single terrifying morning and the months that followed, led her past every careful wall he had constructed around himself. She thought of the nursing degree she had feared would gather dust forever, of the hospital that had finally offered her a placement, of the life she had built for herself now that was entirely her own even as it was tangled, inextricably, with his. I'm not going anywhere, she said, and meant it completely, the words landing in the quiet room with the weight of a choice made with clear eyes rather than swept along by circumstance. Not because you need protecting. Because I choose this. I choose you. Rinwoo reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the scar along his knuckle rough against her skin, and neither of them said anything more, because there was nothing left that needed saying, only the quiet certainty of 2 people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances and had chosen, deliberately and with open eyes, to stay.